Every episode, we interview a community leader, a researcher, architect, or planner, developer, or investor to find answers. Answers about how to create better future for our children, create better, healthier, smarter cities. Today I have with me Jehu Leconte. He's a founder of Eden. This is a non-profit organization to help homeless people find relief and stay out of homelessness forever. Jehu has been a social worker for 7 years prior to finding Eden. Welcome, Jehu, and thank you for being a guest on our little show.
Thank you, Israel, for having me. I'm very excited.
Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, about Eden? Why did you find it? How did you find it?
Sure. I've as you said earlier, I've had 7 going to 8 years in social work. I've worked with great organizations such as DYS, Department of Youth Services, DCF, DMH, and work in the community with different nonprofits, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the Brigade program, the YMCA, and I was involved in the shelter and becoming a shelter director, where I served 60 families, 125 kids. And while I was in the shelter, I've noticed there's a pattern where the family, when they receive permanent housing, they ended up relapse back into the shelter again. So I thought to myself, there has to be something that we can do as leaders to reduce relapse or recidivism. And Eden was founded on the belief that we're going to equip families in shelters with the skills and the knowledge and the resources to solve their homelessness permanently.
That's a wonderful mission. That's really admirable, Jehu. So why don't you tell me a bit of about the people or stories about how do they end up homeless? Are they children, youngsters, mothers? What is going on? And you're serving the Boston area, right?
Yes, I am.
Which city exactly? Boston?
We serve Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan.
Yeah, tell us their side of story.
These are regular families who undergo some hardship, and each story is different, and you can never really have a pinpoint of a similar story. They all have the only similarities that they have is that they are all homeless, right? But each and every one of them have different circumstances, different condition that bring them to be part of the homeless population. So it's very difficult to approach homeless families thinking that this is how you're going to solve their problem. But the best approach is to ask them questions such as, how did you get here? What happened? Those are the root cause that we can those are the root cause of homelessness. And we ask this kind of question because it helps us and navigate and create their individualized plan towards self-sufficiency.
What was the most memorable story? The most probably, heartbreaking or memorable?
Oh, well, there are plenty. But one of the families that we work with, her name is Marie. She's been in the shelter for 3 years, never once have a job. And she's a single mom of 3, and her oldest one recently just turned 18. And with the mentorship and the guidance of Eden, she was able to graduate high school. And the youngest one is 5. He's going to go to school in September. So Marie has been in the shelter for 3 years. She was an immigrant from Haiti, and she did not speak the language. She did not have any paper. She was kicked out by her own family. She was sleeping in the park with her three children. Um, and and somebody introduced her to the shelter setting, and she's been in the shelter for 3 years. And so when we started working with Marie had low self-esteem, low self-confidence. She thought to herself she would never get a job because there's a language barrier, and also there's the age. Marie is 43 years of age, and she did not graduate middle school back home, back in Haiti, and she thought to herself her limitation is set. There's nothing that she can do. She's gonna stay in the shelter forever. So, I mean, with the help of the case manager, a lot of work, a lot of self development, Marie was able to find her housing with her children, have a little bit of peace of mind. And we helped Marie prep for an interview. One of our an employer partnership hired Marie, and she was so happy and excited. She jumped up and down, and I don't know, how many hugs I've received that day, and it was so refreshing to see all of her kids jumping around her that she finally received a job after being 3 years in the United States and in shelter. So that's just one little story of a family who's dedicated, who has the potential to be a leader. However, sometimes we overlook that, and we are thinking there's no way this family is gonna go that far. But you never know until you push somebody, until you encourage them, until you empower them to be so.
So once she got a job, can she still stay in the shelter, or she can rent a house, or?
She has a permanent housing. She is now in her own apartment. She's recently left the shelter about 6 months ago, so which is awesome for her.
So Jehu, from your experience, how does life in the shelter look like? Do children get their own rooms? Do they all get one room? Is it like a common area? Everyone's.
Yes. So I mean, there are different type of shelters. We have scatter site, we have congregate. There's hotel, there's motel. So in a congregate shelter, the family has a private room, but share the common area. So if you are a single mom of three, therefore you'll be sleeping in your private room with your three children. So that there is no privacy in your own family. Usually the mom and the son and the daughter, they undress in front of each other, no matter what age you are, and that alone can create a great deal of stress, right? And now you are sharing the common area with different folks, different people from different continent, different country, and they all bring their own cultural differences, and that's difficult. And then the next door, you have the Spanish speaking. Right after that, we have the Cape speaking, and majority of them don't really speak English. So now you have constantly misunderstanding in the shelter, and there's always a incident report because the family might interpret what the orders have done completely different, and now you hear there's always verbal altercation. Sometimes it might even get to be physical. It's it's quite something to see. No matter how ready you are, how you think that you're going to make everybody get along, it's really difficult. And the shelter leaders are doing the best they can to keep the family together, to address their trauma, and to build themselves. And this is why Eden was founded, is because and we can provide the additional services to the shelter providers.
You mentioned right now. You mentioned a really, really important point. There's a lot of research showing how the lack of privacy affects people behavior, not just for the short time, for a longer time. And affects relationships between people. A big part of my research was about how to provide privacy, not either was it in shelters or students' dormitories or townhouse livings or apartment livings, because once people don't have the choice, they see the same person and they don't have their own privacy. As you mentioned, they have to share a common area with others. The feelings, or I don't know, feelings of or probably patterns of aggressive behavior starts to show, and they try the same groups for students groups, and they shifted the way floor plans are designed and gave people more privacy and more options to move around the building. And they found out that these students became really good friends, and their friendship continued after a very long period. After they graduated, they had children, they were still friends. So that is definitely an important thing to point when, I don't know, for the leaders, for the shelter people, the directors who are running these shelters, or probably in the future for other architects to find convenient and affordable ways to provide privacy. So I'm also curious, who's sponsoring or running? Is it the government who's sponsoring these shelters, or nonprofit organization?
No, it's DSCD. That's the government. They fund shelters. Every, I believe, 2-3 years they renew the contract for the shelter to provide these kind of services to families.
So, do you have data about statistics about what is the demographics, let's say, and how much women and children? Is there a dominant demographics or a certain race, or are there like patterns? Do you find any patterns there?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of data out there, and one of the data that I found fascinating is recently came out back in March by the New York Times. They have done a study where the numbers of homelessness that has been inaccurate for the longest time. They think that the amount that they documented in the past is is far more higher, right? So we in the shelter is being led by 84% of families in the shelter are headed by single mothers.
How much? What is the number?
84.
84.
Yes.
Single mothers. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So single moms suffer from diverse level of traumatized history. From depression and stress, and how do you expect a mom to be um, to be in the marketplace, to have a job while they have children to take care of, and sometimes it could be a little bit difficult for them to find daycare. So that alone really will bring a great deal of stress to the family, right? And the shelter offer a temporary respite by providing food and bed, and often looking for permanent housing in the long term. But these moms have a great deal of potential that's hidden from within, and what we are doing is to make them realize that and bring that out, and looking for a different route, different avenue on how they can reach self-sufficiency.
That's outstanding. And that's shocking. I don't know if there are any government programs like child benefits, but probably to to help these women. That's what you're doing. They need a job. They need to be empowered. So that should be the focus.
No, don't get me wrong. There are great organizations doing incredible job, and DSCD and HUD while constantly looking for effective strategic method to serve the underserved. And they have been doing great job. And it's just that the homelessness population is it's a global issue. Each family have a different story, and and the mission of Eden is to really ask the most crucial question of what happened. Why are you here? Where do you see yourself in the future? Because those questions, if answered, sometimes trust has to be built, and we get to create a plan for the family. Eden offer an intervention and stabilization program, and through our four-phase cohesive solution that addresses the causes of relapse. Um, we create an individualized plans towards the for the family, to reach self-sufficiency, because each family have a different story and condition. um, it cannot be one size fits all.
Mhm.
We have to approach it holistically.
Yeah, I understand. So if there were tweaks in policies or the government policies that need to be addressed, what would you suggest? Like increase the time or offer childcare, or what could be the other than what Eden is doing, obviously. But if there were tweaks in the policy of the government or the programs that HUD offering and other programs.
Well, I mean, as I said before, there are such great organization, in the state is doing phenomenal job, and that's really a difficult question to answer, um, because we are talking to great community leaders, and so I always say, it's easier for leaders like us to restructure and reshape and refine and reinvent ourselves in less than 90 days, of course.
Yeah, because we're small.
I'm sorry.
Because when an organization is small, it's easy to make these tweaks. But when you have a large organization serving a larger community,
Mhm.
any change would take much longer time because it's not easy to cater for individuals.
Yes, it is. You're absolutely right. And as an architect, Israel, in the next 2 4 years, the architectural world, will evolve and effectively change the way building are constructed. And but a leader like yourself will start attending training seminars, webinars to refine your skills and stay relevant to and for the market. But for the homeless families, every single year there's something new. It has become different, and sometimes it's very difficult for the family to refine, restructuring, reshaping their identity, and that's why it's when it comes to policy making, and I would say to have the shelter be held accountable. But the shelter was not created, it was not established for to provide all of these services, right? The shelter can only do so much, but and different organizations have been focusing on one specific services. In other words, it takes a collaboration of all nonprofit that's involved in the homelessness population, and to really make a huge difference, such as a great organization like Break Time are doing phenomenal work by providing employment to young adults, and they are very successful at it, and that is phenomenal to really see that a very new organization being led by young leaders, and I believe the CEO is the age of 20.
What's the name of the organization?
Break Time. Break Time.
Break Time.
Yes, and Connor is the CEO and the founder, and he's so he's an outstanding leader. I've had a chance to communicate with him, and but he's right. We have to hold on to one another in order for us to address this vulnerable population.
So there's a collaboration. So many organizations. Probably the government is offering shelter and housing, and there are other nonprofit offering training, facilitating jobs, and as you're saying, the largest portion of the population or the homeless population is mothers, young mothers. My next question would be, is there a gap that needs to be filled? Or is there a way to prevent homelessness before it happens, like a safety net, like programs to I don't know, we educate these communities and let them reach to help before they end up in the homelessness program.
I think that's a heavy load question. I've asked that question before, and it's still difficult to answer because homelessness is not a problem. Uh, it's a result, right? On any given day, we can become homeless.
Right.
So the New York Times during wrote an article in the midst of the pandemic stating that 25 million of people were on the verge of being homeless, and these are great folk that has been working, never once been homeless, their entire life, and here they are, right? So I I think we can try to end homelessness, but it's going to be. I'm not saying nothing is impossible. It is possible, but it's going to take a great amount of strategic method with all the leaders to come together to do it. But I do believe, however, we can reduce relapse, decrease uh, uh, recidivism.
Yeah.
But to end homelessness, all in general, I'm still pondering on that question, if it's doable, and if it is, how long would that take, and what would be the cost of it per family. All of this comes out of the taxpayer money, and does that mean that the family will reach self-sufficiency then? It's a lot of question in betweens, and I'm still, every day I think of that, if it's a possible thing to do. But that's a good question.
So if I am, let's just hypothetical question. If I'm a nonprofit organization and I secure some land in a town that relatively, let's say, very close in a walking distance to the T line. I have designs for that for I don't know if that's going to be another question. Townhouses or apartment buildings or shelters. If I ask these families, the mothers and the children and everyone in the family, even the children, to help build these places with instructions, of course, and training, short training, would they be will and then in return of not getting paid but having ownership over these units or these dwellings, would they welcome that idea?
um
That's
well
not a pitch. That's just an idea to understand how things are working, let's say.
I think that's a very good idea, but the family needs to be responsible. So for leaders like us, we know that we have to be responsible to all of our decision in life. And when we are paying a mortgage, or rent, paying the car notes, and so on. And when the family, like the basic fundamental financial acumen, right? You put the family in a different environment where they do not know how to to develop a personal financial goals, or how to have a monthly budget, or how to reduce debt, and all of these things, as for you and myself, we can certainly do. And we can, as I said before, we can reinvent ourselves. But by putting the family on in a home, right? And this is why this order requirement is needed for the family to have a job, for the family um, to attend support groups that will help them evaluate and accept their limitation, learn to set realistic mental, physical exercise goals for themselves, and for the family to attend job training in development in industry related to their skills to obtain and retain employment, because the market is changing drastically.
I'm very
Uh, uh,
excited.
so for the family, all of these little skills is needed, because giving the family houses is one of the biggest milestone, but having the family maintain that, and that's where the problem lies, right? For the family to end up learning how to pay their electricity bill. I have a couple of the families I'm working with right now that had housing, but they owe over $2,000 back in gas bill, and
Wow.
uh, 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 close to $1,000 in electricity. Um, and now they're not even working. And now they are calling me today because unemployment is going to stop as of September 4th, right? Completely stop. No one can receive unemployment. Now, what do you think that's going to happen to this family now? So no income's coming in, and they have such amount of debt. So the only thing that they're going to do is probably start looking for work, which we are in the process of doing, and have them get the job as quick as possible. And I help them reaching out to Eversource and National Grid to create a payment plan, so that way they get to reduce that. But could you imagine if the family, were by themselves in that apartment? What would happen to that place? And I think many leaders have the same sentiments as you, Isra, and they want to build a wonderful building and providing to the family uh, at no cost. But however, um, can the family sustain it? And that's the question I always ask myself.
That's a great point. Thank you. I would never imagined that. Thank you, Jehu. You've probably seen, if since you work with different organizations and different cities. Do you think people are more comfortable, like the make neighbors or have better relationships if they were living in? Um, we know now from your previous comment, a shelter was not very comfortable place for people. But how can you compare townhouses to apartments? Is there a preference? Do you see any patterns? I know this is not anecdotal. It's not, probably don't have data, but do you feel is there a preference, or do you see there's an effect? People who went to a townhouse had better prospects from people who went to an apartment, or vice versa. Probably the people who went to apartments got better relationship with their neighbors, got better. So do you notice any kind of these patterns?
Well, I that's also another good question. But when the family is on the street, they're not really looking for what place they can go to, right? They're just the main goal is to have a roof over their head. So they really don't care where, as long as there's a roof over their head, the family is happy. And sometimes, DSCD do transfer the family to a scatter site, where a scatter site is the family can have you know, um, their own apartment, but it all depends on their ADA, and if there is any kind of a mental health condition that restrict them from being in a place that's crowded, and those are also acceptable where the family has their own apartment, but it's still being operated by the shelter, and therefore there are rules. And therefore, you cannot have visitors past 7 o'clock. You cannot. There's a whole lot of other things that you can't do. Having people over, all of these things, put a restriction to the family. So if you are, and the family wants autonomy, wants their own autonomy, they want to be able to invite their friends and family. If they want to sleep over, they want to let the family know, "Hey, sure, sleep over, there's a couch right here." But being under the shelter umbrella, there's that restriction that you would not be able to do. So the family, even though they're in the shelter, even though they are in their own scatter site, in a hotel, motel, or townhouse, um, they're always thinking that I want my own, right? And my own meaning that I don't like to be restricted.
Yeah.
So it's understandable, which I completely agree. However, once you are under the working with the shelter, there's a whole lot of other things that you cannot do, and that restriction is in, if the family break a certain amount of rules, they can get kicked out, and you don't want that.
So once they get into the affordable, this is a process I understand. Once they get into affordable housing, they get their own house. Did the type of the house make any impact on their future or on their situation? The type of the dwelling, if it was apartment or townhouse, or
If they make an impact on their future,
yes, if
it, I mean, it, that's a difficult question to answer because um, each has its own rules. A family can receive something called a home-based voucher, right, where the state contribute $10,000 towards rent. But it's their own apartment. They can do whatever they want. They can set their own rules. In other words, if their rent is $2,000 a month, therefore the family only has 5 months worth of rent, right? Um, so it's very different. In it all depends on the voucher that they receive. There are so many vouchers out there. There's Section 8, there's home base, there's transitional houses. It's every single one of them have a different rules.
that makes sense.
So a family without a job or any educational or professional skills will now need to find a job. And now we are post COVID. I'm not sure if it's post COVID, and you got homeless families competing with highly experienced and skillful individual. And a minimum wage, I'm pretty sure you are aware, cannot cover the family costs of living monthly. Not in Boston, not in Massachusetts, for what I've known.
Sure.
So it's quite difficult.
True. We talk a lot about mixed use and diversity. And let's say I live in an apartment building where the ground floors or other floors have offices and grocery stores. And have you seen any of this type of buildings? And if you did that help people find jobs?
I mean, they are constructing a lot of building that has the at the lower level where they have the market, they have the restaurant, yes,
Yeah.
and those are very good. However, I have not worked with a family that live in that building as of yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get across at least a couple. Um, and the question is, and how is the family sense of self, right? Um, for the family to find a job, even though they know they can go on Indeed and click apply, but when there is a stigma when it comes to homelessness, and when the family comes into the shelter, they usually isolate themselves in their room, right? And they wait for housing in the long term. But to have the family applying for jobs is quite difficult because they are their lowest self-esteem, and because what the shelter provide, there's a lot of on the food that they are eating. It can be a little bit unhealthy because it's mostly canned food. Now the family has increased a massive amount of unhealthy weight, and now when they're looking at themselves in the mirror, there goes their self-confidence. So now, could you imagine that a family with no self-esteem, no self-confidence, and living in a shelter, but with, in addition to their own trauma and raising their kids, and constantly living in a survival mode? Do you think the family has the mental capacity to go ahead and apply for a job and get the job and stay at the job and retain employment for long term? It's possible and it has been done, but the family do need a individualized coach, case manager, and clinician to help them focus on all of these little issues. And we make sure that we build their sense of self, and we make sure that we empower them to for them to start feeling that they can do this, right? It's not going to come from us. We can provide as much or any other services or any other organization. We need to awaken their potential that's inside them, and we need to continually tap into their potential to let them know the road doesn't end there, right? And there is a much bigger road ahead, but they gotta have to see it. They gotta have, you know, they have to want it. So what we do, we provide them with the skills and the knowledge and the tools, um, and yeah, so that helps the families permanently escape homelessness.
I completely understand what you're saying. What and probably in other words, the families you are working with are probably in the lower or the second level of Maslow's pyramid, and to help them get a job, or in order to motivate them to get a job, you you need to get them to, I don't know, the top or somewhere in the middle where they're, so in other words, they don't feel safe.
You could say that.
They don't feel safe, so you need to make them feel safe first. And the way you're doing it is by providing human support, but there's certainly other ways. I mean, it's pretty valuable, but there are other ways to help or support that too. You touched on a really good point, is health. If their health is not, if they're not healthy and their health is deteriorating and they're gaining weight, that's definitely something, affect their self-esteem, affect their, probably they get even more depressed and they don't even want to leave the room. Not to mention go out there and job hunt. And yes, through design there are ways to help that, to improve, to promote health, to promote mental health too. I want you to describe the environment of these shelters in terms of health. Is there like a lot of sunlight? Is there a lot of green? Is yeah, that all that can help. They can go out in the court, if there's a courtyard, they can go out, get some fresh air, walk around. That would probably change a lot for that day, right?
Yes, I. That's a funny question. Um, uh,
Sorry.
no, the majority of the shelter that I've worked with are very decent. They they kept the property very clean and safe because we do have children there, from newborn all the way to 17 and 18-year-old. Um, so, but the shelter do an outstanding job keeping the shelter clean and safe, and also the family has responsibilities. You know, all of the families sometimes they rotate. on who's going to clean the kitchen, who's going to clean the bathroom, and giving, trying to hold the family accountable because they do live here, they do live there, and they need that responsibility. But a lot of time, the family, struggle to even do the work because they don't want to clean anybody else's mess, which is I completely understand, but the shelter do everything in their power to reinforce that. Um, but I worked in a shelter before. The building was so old, they had rodent issues where at night there are uh, hundreds of rodents running around. You see them running around, and the family sometimes don't feel safe, and their kids, especially if their kids suffer from asthmatic condition. Um, but the shelter will take it upon themselves to really have everything exterminated as quick as possible. They will put the family in a motel or hotel for a week, and then they will exterminate the entire um, building just so that way they can keep their family safe. But the shelter does a pretty good job keeping the place pretty decent. But you have to understand that um, they usually have older buildings. They usually have uh, a multitude of families coming in and out. So there's always that going on, and every year, every 6 months, they usually have a worker that comes in, to look at the paint, to repaint again, to fix a couple of things. They do have a maintenance director, and all of this is part of the shelter rules.
Yeah,
But
but not much in terms of recreation and sunlight, and it's it's not as pleasant as a hospital. It's not all hospitals.
you think hospital is pleasant?
No, a lot of hospitals you see they have ponds and fountains and gardens and
True.
large windows and a lot
Mhm.
of sunlight. And an older hospital there was uh, a
Well,
sunroom where people they genuinely thought, which is scientifically proven to be true, they thought that just sitting in the sun,
right,
that's why they
right.
had a sunroom. Sitting in the sun will help people whatever their sickness was, help people recover faster. So
But I,
I
I think I do see your point, but I'm not sure. I'm hoping in the future that um, that happen. Um, but if you make the shelter um, livable to that extent, now the question is, will the family leave?
that's a good point.
Because I wouldn't want to leave because I got a fountain, I got all of this great stuff around me, and I'm not paying no rent, no electricity, no gas bill. The question is, I can do this for a long term. So I think making the shelter livable, but in a way that is uncomfortable as well. Because the longer you stay, the more uncomfortable you become. So that way the family can be motivated, self-motivating to leave and have their own place. But I don't know. I look forward to the future to see what kind of shelter Israel you will build for a family. This is going to be very exciting. I would love to see it. You never know. Maybe the reaction might be different. Maybe the family
It's
might.
will yeah, it will certainly improve their mental health. I
Yes,
can guarantee
yes,
you
I
that.
agree. I agree.
But whether it's gonna motivate them to leave, maybe, maybe.
We'll see.
I can
Only
have
time will
ownership
tell.
of a place like that.
Only time will tell. Yes, yes. But
Well,
that's a very good question.
well, Jay, thank you so much for answering all these questions and
No, thank you so much, Isra, and I genuinely appreciate what you are doing, and this kind of conversation needs to be having a lot more. Because hard categorize homelessness according to a handful of scenarios, and it could be trading sex for housing. staying with friends, cannot stay there longer than 14 days, not being trafficked. And all of this was happening to little girl and moms, and being driven from home, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Um, so in the past year, homelessness in Massachusetts has grown by a staggering number of 14%. So we have a lot of work to
Wow.
do, and the work just begun. So I'll close with this. Eden is not just an organization; it's who we are. We are empowered and dedicated to helping families permanently escape homelessness. And the work is going to be done with great leaders like yourself to continually asking those difficult questions, um, to leaders like me and others, and so that way we can come up with a holistic solution to address homelessness.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all the great you're doing, and thank you for being a guest on my little show.
Anytime, anytime.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. I look forward to see the final product.